You are about to make the worst decision of your life. I know that because I made it 30 years ago. I sat in a chair just like yours in a guild office just like this one, and I looked at a contract just like the one sitting in front of you right now. I read the name on it. I read the species classification, and I laughed. My name is Kreth Vaughn. I do not say that to impress you. At this point in my life, I say it only when I need someone to listen carefully. And I need you to listen carefully right now. I have been hunting for over 200 years. I have crossed 47 star systems in pursuit of marks. I have brought in beings that other hunters refused to touch, warlords, syndicate leaders, creatures that could crack a ship's hull with their natural strength. I have a record of 847 confirmed captures, 6 escapes. 3 of those ended with the mark dead by someone else's hand before I could collect. I tell you this not to show off. I tell you this so that when I say what I am about to say, you understand it does not come from fear, and it does not come from weakness. It comes from the single most important lesson my 200 years of hunting has ever taught me. The contract in front of you has a human's name on it. Put it down. Walk away. Tell the client you are unavailable. Tell them you are sick. Tell them you retired. Tell them anything you need to tell them, but do not take that contract, because if you do, you will not be hunting a person. You will be stepping into a trap that was built the moment they realized someone might come for them, and you will not even know you are inside it until the walls are already closing. I know this because the trap closed on me. His name was Marcus Vale. 30 years ago, the Veth Syndicate contacted my office on Keth Station with an offer that was frankly insulting in how generous it was. The number they quoted was 3 times my standard rate. At the time, I took that as a sign of how badly they wanted him back. Looking back now, I think it was the universe trying to warn me. The file they sent was thin. That should have been my first signal. In my experience, a thin file on a mark means one of 2 things. Either the target is genuinely unimportant, or the client does not fully understand who they hired. With Marcus Vale, it was neither. The file was thin because Marcus Vale had spent considerable effort making sure it stayed that way. What I knew, he was a cargo runner, mid-30s by human reckoning, operating a single crew freighter called the Harrow Dawn out of a mid-rim port called Shelter S. Crossing. He had no criminal record on any register system, no military service, no listed affiliations. His tax records were clean, his transit logs were unremarkable, and his last known position was 3 days old by the time the file reached me. He had, according to the Veth Syndicate, stolen a drive core containing sensitive operational data. They wanted it back. They wanted him delivered alive. They were willing to pay an extraordinary amount of money for both. I accepted the contract the same afternoon I received it. I want to be honest with you about my state of mind. At that moment, I was confident in a way that I am now embarrassed to remember. I had been hunting for nearly 2 centuries. I had a methodology that had never seriously failed me, and Marcus Vale was, by every measurable standard, an ordinary human cargo runner with no training, no support network, and a second-hand freighter. I pulled up the Galactic Species Archive on humans while I was preparing my equipment. I had worked with humans before, in passing. They were a relatively young interstellar species, only about 200 Years into regular contact with a wider galaxy, the archive's entry was thorough, in the way that all archive entries are. Thorough, precise, detailed, and completely useless for what I actually needed to know. Fragile skeletal structure, limited environmental tolerance, short natural lifespan, no documented psionic ability, no natural physical weapons beyond blunt teeth and flat fingernails, moderate endurance, unremarkable speed, below average strength compared to most spacefaring species. I read that entry, closed my terminal, and thought, this should not take long. I packed for a 2-week job. My ship, the Veth Commission Tracker vessel the Syndicate provided for this specific contract, was the finest locating craft in that sector. I had my full kit: restraint gear, scanner arrays, 2 sidearms, a personal environmental shield, and enough field rations to last 6 weeks if I needed them. I had a contact network across 40 systems. I had 200 years of experience reading beings, reading terrain, and reading situations. Marcus Vale had a beat-up freighter, a 3-day head start, and whatever was in his pockets when he ran, I was not worried. 3 days out from Shelter's Crossing, I picked up his transit trail through a way station called Paul Marin's Drift. He had refueled there, paid and registered currency, no attempt to hide it, and filed a standard departure log pointing toward the Cashin Belt Trade Corridor. A busy shipping lane, lots of traffic. Good place to blend in. I followed. He was not in the Cashin Belt. There was a ship registered under a variant spelling of the Herodin's ID number, which was clever enough that it took my scanner nearly 4 hours to flag the discrepancy. By then, the real Herodin had already moved on. I backtracked. I found the actual exit point. I recalculated. He had used the Cashin Belt traffic as cover to double back toward Paul Marin's Drift, then cut through a less monitored shipping corridor toward the outer rim. I adjusted my course and told myself this was simply a competent fugitive doing what competent fugitives do. I told myself that for 3 more days. By the end of the first week, I had tracked him to a mid-rim trading post called the Varnish Stop. According to my information, he had been there 2 days before I arrived. He had purchased food, supplies, a signal booster, and a crate of general hardware components. He had spoken to local mechanic about a fuel line issue. He had been polite. According to 3 separate witnesses, he left no forwarding information. The hardware components bothered me. I went through the purchase list carefully. Each item on its own was ordinary: a signal booster, calibration tools, adhesive compound, a length of flex conduit, 2 pressure valves, a set of micro charges typically used in mining operations, a cargo runner with a fuel line issue. Had no reason to buy micro charges. I stood in the middle of the Varnish Stop supply corridor with that purchase list in my hand, and for the first time since accepting the contract, I felt something shift in the back of my mind. It was not quite alarm. It was more like the sensation of realizing you have been reading a map upside down. I left the Varnish Stop. Carefully, I ran a full scan of my ship. Before boarding, I checked my exit corridor twice before I used it. Nothing was wrong, but I was no longer laughing. That night, drifting in a holding position while I reran my tracking algorithms, I went back to the archive. Entry on humans. I read it again more slowly this time. I was not looking for weapon statistics or physical threat. Ratings. I was looking for something the numbers did not capture. I found a small section near the end of the entry tucked between a paragraph on human communication, patterns, and a set of biological data. Tables. It was easy to overlook. Most hunters I know have never read that far into a species profile for a non-combat target. It said humans are distinguished among known spacefaring species by their unusually high capacity for long-range planning under stress conditions, unlike most species, whose decision-making degrades significantly when survival is threatened. Humans frequently demonstrate improved problem-solving capability in high-pressure scenarios. This trait is believed to be an evolutionary adaptation from their planet's early history. I read that paragraph 4 times, then I pulled up every additional document the archive had on human evolutionary history, and I started reading, and I did not stop until the early hours of the next morning. And somewhere around the 3rd hour, when I was reading about a period in their planet's ancient past when small groups of humans had apparently survived conditions that should have eliminated them entirely, something cold settled in my chest. I had taken this contract because Marcus Vale looked easy, but nothing in the universe had ever told him to be easy. Everything his species had ever survived had told him exactly the opposite. I was 3 days behind him in unfamiliar space, and he had already bought microcharges. I kept moving because that is what I do, but I kept the ship's full scanner array running. I checked every corridor before I entered it, and I stopped reassuring myself. When you have hunted as long as I have, you learn to tell the difference between a mark who is running and a mark who is moving with a destination in mind. Marcus Vale was not running. He was going somewhere, and I was starting to suspect that part of that destination was me. The second message from Marcus Vale arrived on a Tuesday. I remember the day because I had been awake for 36 hours by then, running tracking calculations and eating cold ration packs over my terminal like a junior hunter on their first difficult contract. That detail still irritates me. The message was short. It came through an untraceable relay, bounced off at least 6 different nodes before it reached my ship's receiver. I traced the relay chain for 4 hours before I accepted that I was not going to find the origin point. It read, "Are you the type who gives up when this stops being profitable?" No greeting, no name signed. At the bottom, he did not need to sign it. I sat that message for a long time. In 200 years of hunting, no mark had ever sent me a message that was not a threat, a plea, or an attempt to negotiate surrender terms. Those were the 3 categories. A message that was none of those things did not fit any box I had built in 2 centuries of professional experience. It was a question, a genuine one as far as I could tell. He was not threatening me. He was not begging. He was asking me something he actually wanted to know the answer to. I did not respond. A hunter does not respond to their mark. That is a basic rule, and I had not broken basic rules in a very long time, but the question stayed with me, sitting at the edge of every calculation I ran over the following days. Let me tell you where I was at this point so you understand how the situation stood. 3 weeks into the contract, I had tracked Marcus Vale across 9 separate transit points, 2 of which had required me to call in favors from contacts I had not spoken to. In years, my expenses were already running over budget. He had used 6 different route approaches, 3 of which I was only able to reconstruct after the fact by cross-referencing witness accounts and supply purchase records. He had covered his trail thoroughly, but not invisibly. There was always something left behind, always a thread I could follow. I was beginning to wonder if those threads were left on purpose. The hardware purchased at the varnish stop had not been the last unusual supply acquisition. At a refueling depot called Right Anchor, he had bought 4 lengths of heavy cable and a portable atmospheric sensor. At a station called the Gantry, he had acquired welding equipment and a compact power cell. At a place with no official name that the locals simply called the Shelf, he had purchased signal jammers and a water filtration unit. Each purchase taken alone was unremarkable. A freighter captain doing maintenance and prep work, nothing alarming. I listed every item in a column and looked at the list as a whole. It took me about 90 seconds to understand what I was looking at. He was building something, not one thing necessarily, more likely several. Some things. Each purchase was a component. Each component served a function, and the functions, when I mapped them out, were not defensive in any abstract sense. They were specifically functional, specific terrain, specific conditions. He knew where he was going, and he was preparing that place for my arrival. That realization landed on me like a physical weight. Think about what that means. Man with no military training, no known combat history, running from one of the most experienced hunters in the registered galaxy, and he was not simply fleeing. He was not looking for a hole to hide in. He was looking for ground. He was selecting it deliberately, moving toward it across 3 weeks and 9 transit points. And while he moved, he was shopping. I had been thinking of this as a chase. It had never been chase. It had been a walk to a place he had already chosen, and I had been following him exactly where he wanted me to go. I changed my approach completely. After that, I stopped following the trail he was leaving and tried instead to calculate where he was going. I pulled regional maps of the outer rim sectors he had been moving through. I looked for locations that matched the profile suggested by his supply purchases, somewhere with an atmosphere thin enough to need a filtration unit, somewhere with structural elements that heavy cable and welding gear might be used to reinforce or modify, somewhere with enough ambient interference to make signal jammers a reasonable precaution. There were 11 possible locations in range. I ranked them by probability and started checking them. The 4th location I checked was a decommissioned mining installation on a small airless rock called Vest 4 in the outer band of a barely cataloged system. The atmosphere there was not fully airless. There was a thin envelope breathable gas near the surface, enough to survive in short exposure but not enough to be comfortable. The installation had been abandoned for about 15 years, left behind when the ore deposits ran out. The structures were still standing. I got a faint energy reading from it when I scanned, too faint to identify clearly. Could have been residual from the old equipment. Could have been something active. I circled the system for 6 hours, running passive scans, saying nothing, touching nothing. Then I landed, because that is what hunters do. We go toward the uncertain signal. We do not sit in orbit and wonder. I want to tell you about the installation at Vestige 4 because this is the moment where everything changed, not just the contract me. The structure was spread across about 200 m of flat low-gravity terrain, several connected buildings, low profile, built for function rather than anything else, the kind of construction you see at extraction sites. Across the outer rim, sealed corridors, heavy door panels, pressurized sections for the workers who had lived there. Once everything dark and cold and still, I moved through it carefully. I had my scanner running. I checked every corner. I tracked the faint energy signature deeper into the installation. Through a main corridor, past a row of empty equipment bays toward what had once been the central operations room. My scanner lit up about 8 seconds before I reached the operations room door. It did not light up because it had found Marcus Vale. It lit up because it had found the first of the sensor triggers. I stopped. I stood in that cold, dark corridor on a dead rock in an unnamed system, and I looked at the readout on my scanner, and I began to understand. The sensor trigger was connected to something. I traced the connection. It led to a second trigger positioned at the other end of the corridor. I had already walked past it without activating it because I had come in from a different entrance point than the one he had probably expected. It was a close thing, a matter of about 3 m. I stood still and ran a full environmental scan, the kind that takes 4 minutes and maps every signal in a 50 m radius. What came back on my screen made the cold feeling in my chest spread out through my whole body. He had been here for at least a week. The modifications to the installation were extensive. Power siphons pulled from the old mining grid, feeding a network of devices distributed through 3 of the 5 connected buildings. Gravity regulators, not strong enough to incapacitate, but enough to make movement unpredictable and footing unreliable. Signal barriers at every exit point, keyed to block standard emergency frequencies. 2 separate arrays of the microcharges I had noted from the varnish stop placed at structural load points on the building I was currently standing in, and something else, something I had not fully expected. Even then, he had mapped the whole place, not just physically. He had mapped the sight lines, the entry angles, the acoustic patterns in the corridors. I found his notes later, but I could already see the evidence of it in how every device was placed. Nothing was positioned carelessly. Every component occupied the spot that would make it hardest to detect from standard entry points, and most effective from the angles a person would naturally take when moving through unfamiliar terrain. He had not just prepared the ground, he had studied it the way a hunter studies their territory. There is a word I use for that. I have used it to describe myself in my better moments. I have used it to describe Marks, who gave me real difficulty over the years. It is not a word I ever expected to apply to a human cargo runner with no listed combat experience. The word is professional. I was not dealing with a frightened man who had gotten lucky. I was not dealing with a clever amateur who had watched too many tactical programs. I was dealing with someone who had looked at his situation clearly, assessed his resources accurately, selected his ground intelligently, and prepared it thoroughly. And he had done all of this while staying 3 days ahead of me across 9 transit points, while sending me exactly the right amount of trail to keep me following without making me suspicious enough to stop. I had been managed from the first relay. At Pole Marin's drift to this cold corridor on Vest 4, my movements had been in some meaningful sense guided. I will tell you something that I've never told any other living person. Standing in that corridor, reading my scanner, understanding what I was looking at, I was afraid, not of the charges in the walls, not of the gravity traps or the signal blocks. I was afraid in the specific way that a hunter becomes afraid when they realize for the first time in a very long time that they might not be the most capable person in the situation. I decided to move. I chose the safest path out of the building, carefully, slowly checking every step. I almost made it. The trigger I had missed on the way in was not a sensor trigger, it was on a timer. I was 12 m from the door when the gravity regulators activated throughout the building simultaneously, and the lighting system, which I had not even identified as something he had modified, cut to full darkness, and the floor underneath my left foot shifted at an angle my body was not expecting. I went down hard. My scanner hit the floor and skittered away. My left arm took the impact badly. I got up immediately. That is trained 200 years of it, but I was disoriented in the dark in a gravity field that was fluctuating in irregular pulses with charges in the walls and a signal block over every exit. I survived the next 4 hours because I am very good at what I do, but I want to be honest with you about the margin. The margin was not comfortable. When I finally got clear of the installation, my ship was 40 m away, and my left arm was not functioning properly. I had used my emergency beacon, which I had been careful to run on a non-standard frequency, one of several personal modifications I had made to my kit over the years, and I had my 2 side arms, one of which was still fully charged. I had 2 broken components in my scanner and a crack in my environmental shield generator, and somewhere in that installation or nearby, Marcus Vale was watching. I know this because when I reached my ship and got the hatch open and sat down on the floor of the cargo bay with my back against the wall, I found a small sealed container sitting just inside the hatch. It had not been there when I landed. Inside the container, a field medical kit, including a bone reset brace for left arm injuries, and a small written note. The note said, "I didn't bring you here to end this. I brought you here so you'd understand what you're dealing with. There's water in the kit. Drink it. You've had a long day." I sat on the floor of my cargo bay for a while. I drank the water. I used the bone reset brace. Then I did something I had not done in many years. I sat quietly and I let myself think about what I had gotten wrong, not the tactics, not the specific mistakes in the corridor. Those were real, but they were details. What I had gotten wrong was something larger, something more fundamental, something that lived in the assumptions I had brought to this contract. From the very first moment I read Marcus Vale's file and laughed, I had looked at the archive entry and seen the numbers, fragile, short-lived, no natural weapons. I had not asked the right question. The right question was not what Marcus Vale was. The right question was what his species had survived in order to become what they were. I had not asked that question. I had not thought it was relevant. I opened my terminal from the floor of my cargo bay, one arm in a brace, and I pulled up the human evolutionary history files again. This Time I read them differently, this time. I read them as a hunter trying to understand another hunter, and what I found there over the next several hours was not comforting. These were beings shaped over hundreds of thousands of years by a world that was trying to eliminate them at every turn. Cold, heat, disease, predators larger and faster and stronger than anything they could match physically, internal conflicts so constant and so brutal that they had nearly erased themselves from their own planet multiple times. They had survived all of it, not by being the strongest, not by being the fastest, by being relentless, by adapting, by remembering what had nearly killed them, and then spending generations building answers to it, the microcharges and the gravity traps and the signal blocks on Vest 4 were not remarkable because Marcus Vale was clever. They were remarkable because they were exactly what you would expect from a being whose entire evolutionary history was one long lesson in how to outlast a larger, stronger adversary. He had not learned to do what he did at Vest 4 in the weeks since the Veth Syndicate came after him. He had been learning it his whole life. His species had been learning it for longer than most races in this galaxy had been looking at the stars. I sat with that for a long time. Then I got up, checked my ship system, and went to find Marcus Vale, not to complete the contract, to talk. He was in the operations room of the installation. I know that now. At the time I did not know exactly where he was, but I knew he had not gone far because the field kit had been placed inside my ship's hatch, and that meant he had been close enough to do it quietly while I was occupied. I broadcast a short signal on a mid-range general frequency, not an emergency frequency, not anything coded, just a simple repeating pulse that meant, in the basic standard that most species recognize, that I wanted a conversation. It took him 4 hours to respond. He came out in the early hours of what passed for morning on Vest 4, when the temperature had dropped low enough that I could see my own breath inside my suit. I was sitting against the outer wall of the installation in a spot with clear sight lines on 3 sides, which was a habit rather than a strategy by that point. He came around the corner from the east side of the structure and stopped about 10 m away. He was not what I had pictured. I realized that is a strange thing to say about someone I had been chasing for 3 weeks, but the file had given me almost nothing physical to work from, and my imagination had apparently filled the gaps with something harder and sharper than the real person. He was average height by human standards, brown hair cut short, showing some gray at the edges. He was wearing a standard environmental suit that had been repaired in several places, neat repairs carefully done. He was carrying nothing in his hands that I could see. He looked at me for a moment without speaking, then he said, "How's the arm?" I told him it was functional. He nodded. He came closer, not all the way. He stopped at about 5 m, and he sat down on a piece of fallen structure that put us roughly at the same height. He was not relaxed exactly, but he was not tense in the way frightened people are tense. He was calm in the way that people who have been operating at high intensity for a long time are calm when they finally have a moment to stop. I had seen that particular kind of calm before in other hunters. Mostly. I asked him directly, why had he not finished it in the installation when he had the advantage? He did not look surprised by the question. He thought about it for a moment, the way people do, when they want to give an honest answer, rather than a quick one. Then he said, "Because I didn't need to, and because you're not the problem." I asked him what the problem was. He told me, and this is where the story changes from being about a hunt to being about something larger. The drive core data that the Veth Syndicate wanted back was not stolen goods. It was not commercial intelligence or financial records or any of the dozen things I had assumed it might be when I accepted the contract. It was documentation, operational records of 3 separate incidents in which Veth Syndicate freight operations, routed through systems near the human-occupied Outer Rim territories, had made decisions that resulted in the destruction of 3 small human colony settlements, not by accident, by calculation. The settlements had been in the way of a resource extraction agreement the syndicate had been negotiating with a local governing body. The settlements were legally registered and protected under Galactic Council colonial charter. The syndicate had documentation that they knew this. They had destroyed the settlements anyway and submitted falsified incident reports attributing the losses to navigation failures. 412 people across 3 separate colony sites. Marcus Vale had been a freight coordinator for a syndicate-affiliated contractor at the time. He had seen the real records. He had understood what they meant. He had copied them onto a drive core and walked out of his job and spent the next 18 months trying to figure out how to get that data to someone who could act on it, while the syndicate spent those same 18 months trying to find him quietly before he succeeded. When quiet options had not worked, they had hired me. I sat against the outer wall of an abandoned mining installation on a dead rock in an unnamed system, and I listened to Marcus Vale explain this to me in a flat, careful voice, and I thought about 412 people, and I thought about the contract in my ship's storage, and I thought about 200 years of professional decisions, and I thought about what the word professional is actually supposed to mean. When he finished speaking, we sat in silence for a while. Then I asked him the question I had been building towards since the moment he left that note in my cargo bay. I said, "When you were in the installation, when I was inside the building and you had every device in place and the signal blocked, what would you have done if I hadn't come out?" He looked at me steadily. "I had 3 more options ready," he said. He described them calmly, without any performance in it. No threat, no pride, no attempt to impress me. He simply described what he would have done, in what order and why each step would have followed from the last. He described the contingencies he had for each option. He described the decision tree he had built in his head for how the situation might develop, depending on my response to each step. It was, technically speaking, one of the most thorough operational plans I had ever heard described, and it had been built by one man on the move in 3 weeks, with hardware components bought at supply depots across the Outer Rim. I did not say anything for a long time after he finished. Then I reached into my kit, pulled out the physical contract chip the Veth Syndicate had given me, and I held it up between 2 fingers so he could see it clearly. Then I pressed the override key on the chip's edge, the manual termination function that burns the contract data and releases all tracking tags, and I held it until the chip was dark and blank in my hand. Marcus Vale watched me do it. He did not react visibly. He did not say thank you, which I respected. He just watched. I told him, get the data out, whatever route you have to take, whatever it costs you, get it out, get it to someone with Galactic Council access who cannot be pressured by syndicate money. He nodded once. I stood up. My arm hurt. I was tired in a way that went past physical. I said one more thing before I went back to my ship. I said, I read about your species, the history, the old part. He waited. You are all built from something that refused to stop. I said, every one of you. He looked at me for a moment. Something moved in his expression, not quite a smile, not quite. Something sadder than that, more like recognition. Yeah, he said, we are. I went back to my ship. I did not look back. I left Ves 4 and I filed a contract termination report with my guild office, citing irreconcilable target verification failure, a technical category that means the client misrepresented the nature of the mark. It protects my record without requiring me to explain what actually happened. The Veth Syndicate tried to dispute it. I did not take their calls. That is what I am telling you now, sitting in this office, watching you look at that contract. You want to know what happened after? That is a reasonable thing to want to know. Marcus Vale got the data out. I do not know exactly how. I made no further contact because I thought it was better for both of us if I did not. What I know is that approximately 8 months after I left Ves 4, a formal complaint was filed with the Galactic Council's Colonial Oversight Division, supported by authenticated documentation of the 3 incidents. The Veth Syndicate's senior operational leadership was remanded to Council custody within a year of that filing. The lower levels of the organization scattered. The syndicate itself, as a functioning entity, no longer exists. Marcus Vale's name appears nowhere in the public record of those proceedings. Whether that was by design or by the arrangement of someone who helped him, I do not know. What I know is that he is, as far as I have been able to determine, still alive, still moving, exactly as difficult to find as he was when I was paid to find him. I spent 14 months recovering from the injuries I sustained at Vestal 4, not just the arm. There were other things: 3 cracked structural bones, damage to my environmental suit's pressure lining that I had not fully noticed at the time, and an impact concussion that I had also failed to properly notice at the time, which my medical team informed me was not a minor oversight. I came back to hunting after that. I am still hunting now, but I came back differently. I came back having understood something that I want you to understand, because you are sitting in front of that contract and I can see in your face that you are thinking the same things I thought 30 years ago. You are looking at a name and a species classification, and you are running the same calculations I ran. Fragile, no weapons, short lifespan, new to the galaxy. Let me tell you what those numbers do not contain. They do not contain the 100,000 years of history that shaped every human who has ever lived. They do not contain the memory of a species that survived the full severity of a dangerous planet without any of the biological advantages that most spacefaring races take for granted. They do not contain the particular quality of mind that emerges when a creature learns over thousands of generations that the way to survive a world that is trying to eliminate you is to think further ahead than the threat, to use the environment against the thing coming for you and to keep moving no matter what. Every human who has ever lived carries that inheritance. You cannot read it in a species profile. You cannot see it in the biological statistics. It does not show up on any threat index I have ever reviewed, but it is there in every single one of them, underneath whatever ordinary life they are living, underneath the cargo runner and the researcher and the station clerk and the trader, underneath every human face you will ever encounter in this galaxy. There is something very old and very patient and very, very good at surviving. I have hunted things that could crush a ship hull with their grip. I have tracked species that could move through vacuum without a suit. I have brought in beings with natural armor that standard sidearms could not penetrate. I have never said what I am about to say about any of them. Do not hunt humans, not because you will necessarily fail, not because every human is a Marcus Vale. Most of them are not. Most of them you will never meet, and most of the ones you might be contracted against will not have his particular combination of intelligence and preparation and nerve, but some of them will. You will not know which ones until you are already inside the trap they have built for you, and by that point the question is no longer whether you can win. The question is how much it is going to cost you to find out. I lost 14 months and a significant portion of my professional confidence on Vest 4. I got off lightly. I have spoken with hunters who took human contracts after I declined them. Not many of those conversations happened in person. You are young, you are good. I have read your file, which is why I agreed to speak with you today. You have genuine talent and you have time ahead of you. Do not spend it on a human contract. There are other marks on that board. Marks whose threat profiles are honest. Marks who, when they run, are running because they are afraid and not because they are moving to a position they have already selected and prepared. Find one of those, build your record. Come back to me in 10 years and tell me about the contracts you took and the marks you brought in, and I will listen with genuine interest, but slide that contract back across the table and do not laugh when you read the species classification. I made that mistake once. It cost me 14 months and taught me the single most important lesson of 200 years of hunting. The lesson is this: every species in this galaxy that reaches the stars does so by surviving something, by enduring whatever their home world threw at them across hundreds of thousands of years, and coming out the other side changed, hardened, shaped. Most species survived by becoming stronger or faster or better defended. Humans survived by becoming better at thinking inside a situation that was trying to destroy them. They survived by turning the environment into a weapon. They survived by refusing to stop adapting, no matter how many times the situation changed. They survived by making plans that extended beyond the immediate crisis, by using the very act of being hunted as information, by asking questions and understanding the answers, and building their next move around what they had learned. And here is the part that took me a long time to fully understand. That is not a skill. It is not a talent that some humans have and others lack. It is what they are. It is what 200,000 years of hard history made them into. You cannot assess it from a file because it does not live in any one individual's record. It lives in the whole species passed down in 1,000 ways that are not genetic through stories and knowledge and the long memory of everything their ancestors survived. When you go after a human, you are not going after one person. You are going after everything that person inherited from a world that tried to end them and failed. I am the deadliest hunter in the registered systems. I have 200 years and 847 confirmed captures. I am telling you, with full professional seriousness, that I would not take a human contract today. For any amount of money, put the contract down, walk away, and if anyone ever tells you that humans are easy, if anyone ever pulls up that archive entry and points at the biological statistics and says this one will not be difficult, you look them in the eye and you think about what I have told you today, then you walk away from that conversation too. I have one more thing to say and then I am going to let you go. When I left Vest 4, when I flew away from that dead rock and began the long trip back to file my termination report, I thought about the last thing Marcus Vale had said to me, that single quiet acknowledgement, yeah, we are no pride in it, no performance, just the simple recognition of a fact about his species that he had clearly known for a long time, had probably known the way people know things that are so fundamental they stop thinking about them consciously, the way you stop thinking about your own heartbeat. He had been running for over a year before I found him. He had been alone for most of it. He had been carrying 412 names in the evidence of what happened to them and the knowledge that very powerful interests wanted both him and that evidence to disappear. He had done all of that while staying ahead of the best hunter in the registered systems, and when it was over, when I burned the contract and told him to get the data out, he had not looked relieved. He had not looked proud. He had looked like someone who had done a necessary thing and was already thinking about the next necessary thing. That is what they are. That is what all of them are underneath. Whatever they show you, remember that. Now put the contract down.